Hello everyone, and welcome back to episode 18 of Welcome to the Dark Sun, also known as the one where the DM gives all the exposition. Okay, so I want to talk about three main overarching umbrella points. The first one I want to talk about is the core concept I originally had that caused me to create this Dark Sun adventure. I want to talk about the mechanics, the second thing, because we played it in 5th edition and I used primarily 2nd edition, so how I made those two mesh. And lastly, I want to talk about the story, what inspired me, what I had in mind, and where I want to go from here. The original concept I had before I settled on a setting or on any details is I wanted to play a tabletop D&D game that would have buy-ins. So say you come to the table, you put $20 in to roll up your character, then every time you hit 0 HP, you put $5 in the pot. These are just off the top of my head. This would give real-world consequences to death. You know, I would be incentivizing smart play versus risky. In the end, whoever made it back to their home base alive would get to split this real-life horde that we've put together. The DM would need to be uninvolved in any of it, in the money, because you need to be impartial. So the game would need to be challenging but not unfairly cruel to the players. So I started looking at settings. What would be a good challenging setting for this? And so, well, there's Dark Sun. This would work well with a series of small adventures. That way, not only is the environment likely to kill them on Dark Sun, there'd be a lot of little pieces of challenges, little monsters, little bad guys. Plus, one of the great things about Dark Sun is that the big bad in Dark Sun are often Defiler Wizards. And the way Defiler Wizards work is they draw power from life itself. So that really worked very thematically with my concept of increasing the horde, because every time they die, every time they lose their life, then the horde grows. And so it was a really perfect fit. But in the end, and like really close to the end, it turned out I couldn't do that. I couldn't bring myself to do that. I know it's not very different from having, say, a poker game with your friends where you just throw some money in. But at our table, we have a pretty big spectrum of income levels, and I just couldn't do that. I don't like the idea that people might be arguing about an unfair outcome, or say someone doesn't want to come because they can't afford to die that week or something. That's really not the kind of table that I want to have. The original concept of monetizing death was ultimately removed, but by that point I had a pretty comprehensive Dark Sun campaign written. So now let's talk about the mechanics. As I'm sure you're well aware, Tiffany's talked a lot about the fact that we've been playing in 5th edition. It was always going to be in 5th edition. We could have done it in 2nd edition, but I'm more familiar with 5th edition. I find 5th edition is more easy to use, and everybody at my table is familiar with 5th edition. There's, you know, it's shiny and new too, but for us it was 5th edition, so I had to find a way to make it work in 5th edition. So Dark Sun was originally a campaign setting for Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. It did see a 4th edition version, which I did read for some content, but I primarily drew from 2nd edition for the source books and the content. Dark Sun was a 2nd edition campaign supplement, and so what that does is it's going to provide the setting. It's going to give you a pretty good idea of what the setting is, and it's going to have a few rules, and any place where those rules are in conflict with the 2nd edition Player's Handbook or Dungeon Master Guide, the rules in Dark Sun are taken to supersede those ones. I tried to do the exact same thing with 5th edition. Basically, I wanted to convert as little as possible, almost nothing. Nothing if I could get away with it. And just run Dark Sun in 5e, as close to 2e as possible. I think a lot of people that do conversions from, say, Dark Sun or Birthright, Planescape, or Spelljammer, they all get kind of conversion happy, and they make more changes than they really need to. They tend to overthink balance and other things. That being said, I did find I had to do more conversion than I anticipated. 5th edition agreed on Dark Sun's water consumption levels, which was really handy. Both Dark Sun and 5th edition say that all creatures, medium and small, require 1 gallon of water a day, and both agree that anything larger than that takes up to 4 gallons a day. So I decided to take 5th edition's exhaustion levels instead of the D4 of con loss that they recommend in Dark Sun, because exhaustion levels are just easier, and, you know, rolling for con loss and then recalculating your hit points, that's a real pain. So I decided to just do the exhaustion levels because they're very convenient. I took out a few races from the PHB to make them not available in my Dark Sun game, which includes gnomes, half-orcs, tieflings, dragonborn. Those are all unavailable for my players. Similarly, I did quick conversions for Mull, Thri-kreen, and half-giants for people to pick from as well. Mull were pretty easy to convert. I just took their ability score changes from Dark Sun. They can work near tirelessly for a certain number of hours, and so there are some nights where they were able to just stay up all night. For Thri-kreen, I converted them myself. I predominantly ignored the version of Thri-kreen that's available in the monster manual. Thri-kreen got their 5 points of natural armor, so they were starting at 15 instead of 10. And they could get their dex to their AC as well. If you have a third thing that would go to your AC, then you have to choose. You can only have 2 things going to your AC. Your natural armor, your dex, and your con, or your natural armor, your dex, and your whiz. You have to pick 2 out of those 3. Otherwise, you got a crazy broken character. But in keeping with Dark Sun's rules on Thri-kreen, you also can't just put on armor. You're not allowed to just throw a cloak on or a helmet on because you're a Thri-kreen. So that's kind of the balance on that one. Half giants, I converted as well. I converted half giants as well. There is Goliaths in Volo's Guide to Monsters as a player race, but if you read it and look closely, you'll see they suck. So I decided to do my own conversion because it was more thematic with Dark Sun. And the conversion is really straightforward. For the most part, they're considered medium creatures. They do consume 4 gallons of water a day. They have a very fluid alignment, so you can roll a d6 if you want and change your alignment every morning. But the main thing that the half giants had was they get double their hit dice at whatever class they've chosen, which is kind of crazy, but that's what I'm warning you about over-conversion. What I did was I still let them do it. Normally, when you choose, say, a fighter who has a d10 hit dice, you would level up and you would get 6 plus your con modifier, which is, say, 3 for the sake of this example. A half giant's hit dice would be 2d10 plus con, so in theory that would be 12 plus 3. With a half giant, you're still going to get both of those hit dice, but you have to roll for them. So leveling up, instead of getting 6 plus 3 for your con modifier, you could get, let's say, 20 plus 3. That's amazing. Or you can just get 5. You roll 1 on both of them. But that's the risk you take. Take it or leave it. But it keeps that thematic half-giant feel in Dark Sun. In Dark Sun, bards weren't allowed to get spells. But if I took away spells from a 5th edition bard, then you basically don't have a class there. So I had to permit bards to still have spells, but we kind of recontextualized those spells as being partially psionic in nature, so that way it would still fit with the theme. I also disallowed paladins. There are no paladins on Athos, the world of Dark Sun. Barbarians were also slightly recontextualized to be called gladiators. I chose to remove sorcerers as well. Dark Sun predates the existence of the sorcerer class, and it just doesn't gel well with the wizard options that Dark Sun presents, which is to say that when you create your wizard, you can either just create a regular wizard from the PHB, which is called a preserver, or you can create a wizard and call it a defiler, which functions a little bit differently. In Dark Sun, whenever a defiler wizard gains XP, according to the Dark Sun campaign setting book, he would get 10% bonus XP. That seems a little bit crazy for 5th edition, but I'm just going to go with it. The idea being that people choose to be defilers because it's very easy to cast magic, and I think that it makes sense to keep the way the 2nd edition rulebook had it, so that the ease of being a defiler is reflected in how easy it is to get XP. So I decided to keep that defiler wizards would always get 10% bonus XP. For combat only. If I award XP for roleplay or for completing a quest, they don't get 10% on that one. It's just for combat when they use their magic. Similarly, druids from Dark Sun, they were supposed to get 10% bonus XP for killing defilers. So they do. Psionics is really important to the Dark Sun setting, and the closest thing we have in 5th edition to a Scion is the Mystic class. That's an unearthed Arcana class. It's not really official. So it's still technically playtest material, but we're on the 3rd revision right now, so I just went with it. So when you make any of these characters, typically in 5th edition, you would roll 4d4, drop 1 dice, and take the best result. Now, Dark Sun has it a little bit differently, because Dark Sun characters, in order to survive on Athos, are a little bit more powerful. In Dark Sun, they suggest instead of using d6s, you roll 5d4s. So that gives us a bigger range, because I can go all the way up to 20. One of the other changes I made, of course, was that because you're more powerful in Dark Sun, you can go up to 22. In 5th edition, you can only go up to 20 as far as ability scores are concerned. The higher power level of the characters is also why you start at 3rd level in Dark Sun, which is something that they said in the 2nd edition source book that I decided to keep as well. You will find no one on Athos that's below 3rd level because it's so hard to survive there. I chose to use the slow natural healing option Slow natural healing is one of the rest variant options that's suggested in the DMG. And the idea is that when you go for a long rest, you still have to roll your hit dice like you do on a short rest. So you can't just take a long rest and pop all the way back up to full HP. Similarly, one of my favorite rules about resting in Dark Sun is that once you hit 0 HP, you can only go to 1 HP afterwards until you finish a long rest. No amount of magical healing will get you back up higher than 1 HP until you've taken a long rest after you've hit 0 HP. So if you hit 0, it's 1 or 0 until you get a long rest. This really works with the brutal theme of Dark Sun. Plus, this goes with my original concept of really encouraging smart play, because if you're only going to go back up to 1 HP if you hit 0, you really don't want to hit 0. So I kind of achieved that goal and I was happy about it. So one of the rules in Dark Sun is that you can only generate water up to your level in gallons per day. In 5th edition, of course, generating water is a cantrip, so you could just go all day, but you can't in Dark Sun, so there is a hard limit to that, which is important because you need water to survive. Similarly, some of my players thought they could get around that with Good Berry, and so I imposed the same limit on Good Berry, that you can only create good berries up to your level a day. But if I looked closer at it, the material component requires you to have some freshly picked berries anyways, and you're not going to find a lot of those on Athos. I also converted quite a lot of Dark Sun monsters from 2nd edition, so I could try to preserve the very unique ecology of Athos. Because remember, this isn't a desert campaign, this is Dark Sun. Conversions were done very simply, so in 2nd edition you have a Thaco instead of your 2 hit modifier, and you would roll a d20 and subtract that from your Thaco. So to convert that, all you have to do is take that Thaco value, subtract it from 20, and that's your new 2 hit modifier. Same with the AC. Just subtract the 2 E monsters AC from 20, and there's its 5th edition AC. It also used to list their hit points by number of hit dice. All monsters had a D8 of hit dice, and I have learned through experience that if it says they've got, say, 2 hit dice, to just maximize that possible value. In 2nd edition, of course, you would literally roll 2 D8s and you'd get 8. But for a quick conversion, I would just take the number of hit dice, times that by 8, and that's their HP for 5th edition. It worked pretty reliably. 5th edition characters do put out a lot of damage, so that was my solution for that one. The last thing I had to really worry about is they don't really list every individual stat on the 2E monster stat blocks. So saves in 5th edition, they tend to target very specific stats. In some cases it's really easy. So if you got a big monster that's doing a lot of damage and he ends up having a +6 to hit and he has to make a strength saving throw against one of the players, then it's pretty reasonable to give him that +6 to his save as well. But that's for strength. If they're doing something that he has to make a charisma saving throw for, then good luck trying to come up with what that is. So my solution there, I would take a d20 and I would take a d4, and I would just roll them together. So the d4 represented their ability modifier and the d20 was the roll. If I thought they might have proficiency to the roll or they'd be really good at this particular one, I would just grab a second d4. And so I'd roll all of those together. Whatever that result is whether they passed or they failed that save. Okay, so now it's time to talk about the story. I called this campaign the Mark of Cinder, because that kind of sounds cool. Cinder's a cool name for a defiler wizard on Athos, but Cinder was a female, so I guess in my headcanon it was short for Cinderella, which is kind of funny. Anyway, Cinder was the defiler end boss they had to work their way up to. They started at level 3 and they had to build up until they felt they were comfortable to fight her. Didn't tell anyone how powerful Cinder was. They had to kind of work that out on their own when they felt confident enough to take her on. But this ended up being a launching pad for a much bigger campaign when I wrote it. I am a lore nerd. I eat up lore like crazy. I find it fascinating, and Dark Sun is insanely rich with lore. So my concept of having a ton of little adventures was a great way to introduce my players to the setting. It was nice having some PCs who would learn about the world at the same rate as their players. I made a lot of robust encounter tables, and I left a lot of what they encountered up to the dice. I did end up having like a bucket list of things that I was really hoping would happen, and every single one came up. They got to have psionic enemies, they got to see silt skimmers, they got to meet the Veiled Alliance, they got to visit the land within the winds, and I couldn't be happier about all that stuff that happened. Now, one of the things about Dark Sun when it originally came out is it had this thing called a meta campaign. And what the meta campaign was is the modules, the fiction, the novels, everything was basically all taken as canon. And so Dark Sun was this ever-moving forward campaign setting. It wasn't static like Greyhawk and Faerun. While that's super fascinating and everything, it leaves the DM kind of in this weird spot of having to pick a spot in the timeline to set his campaign, or her campaign. And so when I started the adventure, I told my players, don't read anything about Dark Sun because I wanted to set it right after the Dark Sun campaign setting book. So right before the very first Dark Sun module, which was Freedom. All of the 4th edition content actually takes place immediately after Freedom. But I thought having King Kalak in charge of Tyr was pretty compelling. So I ended up setting the adventures that we did overlapping with the adventures happening in Freedom. Freedom also takes place overlapping with Troy Denning's book, The Verdant Passage, which was the first piece of literature for Dark Sun as well. Now, if you read much about Dark Sun and its lore, you're going to hear a lot of hate for Troy Denning. Because in order for Troy Denning to write compelling fiction for Dark Sun, and for it all to be considered canon, then his characters are going to have to kind of do things that the player characters could do. So now all of a sudden we got this awkward situation where all of the characters in Troy Denning's fiction are just wiping out Sorcerer Kings, killing the dragon, and doing all the stuff that your characters would want to do in the campaign. Which is a little unfair, I think, both to Mr. Denning as well as the players who want to just enjoy this realm. So all the more reason I felt that I wanted to set this back before the meta campaign changed everything. So what happened was when the player characters returned to Tyr, they found it in upheaval. They walked right into the climax scene of Freedom. And so where I'm going to go from here is this Friday, they're going to roll up their characters and they're going to play through Freedom, which is overlapping with all the events that they witnessed in the first campaign, the Mark of Cinder. They're going to see some events from the other side. They unknowingly influenced one another. Freedom's opening sequence is very railroady, where it just kind of comes up with a bunch of encounters to capture the PCs, and it's very unfair, and I don't think it's a lot of fun, so I decided to be very candid with my players and let them know that they're going to be slaves in this campaign, and we'll still play the opening encounters, but there'll be flashbacks to how they got captured. That'll make it a bit more fun, and there's going to be less people being annoyed that they just, built their character with this cool armor and this cool weapon, and it just gets taken away in the first encounter. Additionally, if I can help it, Troy Denning's characters won't be the ones that slay Kalak at the end. That being said, there is still a failure state, so should all of the PCs end up getting killed, well, I guess Troy Denning's got their back. I think that's pretty much it, yeah. So we're going to go to Freedom, and they're probably going to introduce their other characters. My real big broad idea, if people still enjoy Dark Sun at the end of Freedom, now the timelines will have synced between the characters who reach level 8 at the end of Mark of Cinder, and hopefully they'll be somewhere in the ballpark of 8 at the end of Freedom. And if we still enjoy Dark Sun, then we can go on to either the Road to Uruk, which was the follow-up adventure to Freedom, or they can just have a fun free-for-all adventure in Dark Sun and choose whichever character they want to play. That's still pretty far down the road. Right now I'm just looking forward to running Freedom starting this Friday. So I don't know how Tiffany wraps this up, so I'm just going to say see ya! Like a dog. Burp and scare myself. The next module is going to be Freedom. So when the